You know him, you love him. Then again, maybe not. Chris Christie served 2 terms as the 55th governor of New Jersey, ran for president in 2016, and chaired Donald Trump's transition to the White House. In fact, some people consider him to be a little bit of a Trump whisperer. But we also know that the governor served as the U.S. attorney for the District of New Jersey, and he chaired the Republican Governors Association when he was governor. He also chaired President Trump's Opioid and Drug Abuse Commission. But since leaving office, he's been a regular commentator on ABC News and is now the author of a brand new book entitled Republican Rescue: Saving the Party from Truth Deniers, Conspiracy Theorists, and Dangerous Policies of Joe Biden. Strap in, folks. This is going to be a fun one. Chris Christie, man, welcome to the conversation, bro. It's such a pleasure having you. Merry Christmas, happy holidays to you and the family. I hope everybody's well. Welcome.
I'm great to be here. Amazing that our relationship started right about this time 13 years ago.
I know.
I see you as chairman of the RNC when I was preparing to run for governor of New Jersey, and you were incredibly honest, as you always are. Encouraging, and ultimately incredibly supportive. And I've said to people, there are 2 people in the Republican Party who, if they were not there, I would not have ever been governor. And it's Michael Steele and Haley Barbour. That's it. Michael Steele and the RNC did everything they could to help me win, and so did Haley Barbour. And when very few people, I remember one quick story, when I went down to RGA for the first time as a candidate in February of 2009. And I was walking up the stairs at the JW Marriott, and in front of me was Sonny Perdue, governor of Georgia, former chairman of the RGA. And I said to Mary Pat, I said, look, that guy's really important. I said, we got to say hello to him. So I tapped him on the shoulder. I said, Governor, just want to introduce myself. I'm Chris Christie. He goes, hey, you're the guy running in New Jersey, right? And I said, yeah. He goes, you can't win. So you were running uphill on that one, and Haley Barbour was running uphill with a lot of people thinking you were wasting money. And so, always 2 of my favorite people in the world will be Michael Steele and Haley Barbour, because they believed in me when very few people outside the family did.
So we're the blame for Chris Christie.
For all of it. Well, your fault, Michael. You and Barbour, you can divide it up however you like.
Look, I'll take the blame for that any day of the week. I'll take the hit on that any day of the week, because you really, I remember that meeting so well, and it was straight up just like I am. And I just remember looking at you saying, look, dude, if you're planning to run some white bread campaign for governor of New Jersey as a Republican, I'm not interested. And you're like, there's nothing white bread about me, baby. Nothing.
We'll see it soon, Michael. No problem.
So it's great having you, man. You are in space with a great new read that I recommend to a lot of the folks who follow this podcast. Republican Rescue: Saving the Party from Truth Deniers, Conspiracy Theorists, and the Dangerous Policies of Joe Biden. It is, in many respects, a little bit of a reflective journey of your time in the Washington bubble. A little bit of your backstory as a New Jersey boy. I'll forgive the fact that you were wearing a Dallas cap, but that's okay. I get it. You have made it very clear where your loyalties lie in that regard. But what is it about this book that you want people to take away from it, just at the outset as we start this conversation? This rescue, this idea of rescuing a party, quite honestly, Chris, that some of us feel don't want to be rescued.
Well, there are elements of the party that don't want to be rescued, Michael. You're right. But I've always thought, I used to say this when I was governor all the time, when the press would ask me questions about when a poll showed it was against my point of view, and why was I still advocating for my point of view? And I'd say, look, as a leader, your job isn't to follow polls, it's to change polls. And so I feel the same way about certain elements of the party, that, what I want to emphasize to people are 3 things in this book. One, that we've been here before. And I talk about the John Birch Society,
right?
The role the John Birch Society played, and how William F. Buckley and Ronald Reagan stood against the tide of the John Birch Society and set up a dominance of the conservative Republican Party for the next 30 years. Secondly, I want them to read the facts about all these conspiracy theories and this truth denying out there. Read the facts about birtherism. Read the facts about QAnon. Read the facts about Pizzagate. And obviously then read the facts about the election and how what Donald Trump is saying is simply not true and not supported by any facts.
Right.
I want them to hear that and learn it from somebody who prepped Donald Trump for debates both in 16 and in 20. So I could not be called a never Trumper by any stretch.
Right.
And third, I want them to understand that while we're spending all this time on truth denying and conspiracy theories, Joe Biden is trying to radically change the country in a way that I think most Republicans don't agree with. And that the more time we spend on the former, the less time we can spend opposing the latter. And that isn't in the best interest, in my view, of the country. So those are the three things I want people
to and those are three very important things, but I want to go to the first one because I think the first one sets up the rest of the narrative. You're absolutely right. People don't seem to appreciate the history of that moment where the party pivoted away from its civil rights legacy, which was born out of its birth in 1854, right up to the 1960 presidential election, Eisenhower being the last Republican president to actually garner a cross-section of a popular vote of Americans, meaning he got Black votes, he got Hispanic votes in a significant number. You pivot to this era where you have Goldwater come out and basically embrace segregationism. And then the John Birch Society sort of unleashing its tentacles inside the party. The difference, I would argue, Chris Christie, is that there was a William F. Buckley and there was a Ronald Reagan, among others, Republican leaders in the Senate especially, that would cast out that scourge. Where are they today? Because they're embracing this crap. They're embracing Trumpism. They're embracing QAnon, Marjorie Taylor Greene and all that bullshit. They're embracing the crazy out of Florida with DeSantis and his in the narratives that he's creating. You have political leadership that is driving this corrosive narrative, not standing against it as the two individuals that you cited who push back on the dangers of Bircherism.
Well, I think you're first of all, you're right. Although when you look back on the 1960 to 65, 66 period, Michael, there were people that were very afraid in the Republican Party, with the exception of Buckley and Reagan, to stand up to the John Birch Society. And you had a very similar dynamic if you look at the membership in the House. Remember, George Bush 41 got completely castigated in his Houston district by the John Birch Society, part of which led to his defeat for the Senate,
right,
in 1966, because he voted for the Civil Rights Act. And so you had people like that back then, not only who were willing to stand up, a few of them, but they also paid a political price for it.
Well, and if I could just put a pin on that, because you're right, because if you go back even 5, 8, 10 years before with McCarthyism, right, there was only one woman in the United States Senate who called out McCarthyism, and Margaret Chase Smith. So you're right. You make a valid point that there was this hesitancy. But my point is there were elected leaders who stood in the well of the Senate, who stood in the well of this country's body politic and declared this thing an apostasy on democracy and on the party. And my question is, where is that voice of elect? I mean, look, guys like me, I'm outside the game, right? So when I go off on what I see inside my party, which I have not left, and I refuse to leave because I know it pisses them off that I'm still here, right? The easiest thing for them was to watch Steele walk as, stage left. But the reality of it is, I think a lot of Americans are asking, well, where are those elected voices who would stand in the shoes of a Margaret Chase Smith, a William F. Buckley, who was the philosophical thinking, a Governor Reagan, who was some of the political thinking?
Look, I think you know this. There are a lot of people who whisper this to me and to you. And it was part of the inspiration for the book, was I felt like they needed to give cover from someone. They needed to have someone who had credentials for having supported the president, former President Trump, who was now going to be critical on the facts of where this was taking our party and where it was taking our country.
Mm-hmm.
So, I remember at the time some of my political advisors were telling me it was a risk to write the book, and I said, well, this is the kind of risk that's worth taking to me. And if you look at it, really, in the aftermath of the book, I got one day or so of criticism from Donald Trump where he sent out a statement, criticizing me and mocking me for my record in New Jersey. And my response was, well, I don't really want to get in a back and forth with President Trump, but I said, when I ran for re-election, I got 61% of the vote. And when he ran for re-election, he lost to Joe Biden. We never heard another word from Donald Trump after that.
Because he don't engage when you push back.
No, and so, the fact is, I think that what we need to do is to start giving people the courage to be able to do what they know in their heart is right. And standing up and saying that the 2020 election, while different than any other election I've ever been involved in because of COVID, because of the predominance of mail-in voting and all the rest, there is no evidence that that election was stolen in any one state, let alone in the 5 or 6 states that would have been necessary to reverse the election. And I can tell you, Michael, I'm sure you have the same experience. I talk to friends of mine who are smart people who tell me, oh, yeah, the election was stolen. And then I ask them a couple of questions and throw out a couple of facts, and they go, oh, I didn't know that. I guess it wasn't.
Right. It's true.
I believe you can move these people, but you have to do it in a way which is smart, not dismissive of them, not dismissive of their real disappointment and anger over the loss of the election, given the polarization in our country right now. And that's what the book wanted to start a conversation on. But I will also admit to you, I don't know whether it's going to be successful or not.
Right.
But I think it's worth the try.
So what is it about the party you want to save? As someone, myself, who's a county chairman, state chairman, national chairman, elected official, you not just an elected official, but a prominent leader continuing in the party. What is it that you see in it that's worth saving right now, in given the landscape of individuals that we have who are declaring they are the party? I referenced the recent video of Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz declaring that they are the Republican Party. Margaret Taylor Greene just recently, and I responded to this a couple of days ago on Twitter, talking about Kwanzaa being a made-up religion and just showing a great deal of racist and ignorant tendencies that are reflective of now this Republican Party, since she's declared she's the Republican Party. So what is it that we're trying to save about this Republican Party?
Well, a few things. You know that I write pretty extensively about Marjorie Taylor Greene in the book.
Yes, you do, which is why I referenced her.
And I don't mince any words about.
Which is what I love about Chris Christie.
He's a joke. And the idea that a haircut like Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene say they're the heart of the Republican Party is a joke.
Right.
It's not true. And if self-promotion were in fact the thing you needed to prove in order to prove leadership, then they would be in charge of the party. But that's not the way it works.
That's how it works.
I think what's worthy of saving is that we need a two-party system in this country, Michael. We need people who are going to be counterweights to things like the Build Back Better bill. We need people who are going to be counterweights to what we saw happen in Afghanistan in terms of the withdrawal.
Mm-hmm.
We need people who are going to be counterweights to the idea that the teachers union should run the educational system, the public education system in this country. We need counterweights to people who think that the best way to deal with Iran is to just give them more and more rather than stand up and unite the rest of the Middle East against the potential of a nuclear Iran, rather than sit with Iran and try to wait for them to become reasonable. And we go through all those issues in the book. And lastly, we need a party that's willing to embrace criminal justice reform, but also support the police and recognize that criminal justice reform is something you do with the police and with the community, not to the police and to the community.
Right.
I think all those things are elements within our party, and we have different people within the party who stand for those different elements. They just have not had a uniting figure to be able to bring them together. And remember,
Are you that uniting figure?
I don't know. I mean, look, I would love to try,
Hmm.
but I also know that I've had huge ups in politics and huge downs in
Right.
politics.
We
And
all
not
have.
everything
Yep.
will happen, right? So, I don't know what the future will bring, but what I do know is that people listen to what I have to say, and it infuriates some people. And I get all that reaction on the public sewer that is Twitter. And I get people who are inspired by it. And I have a platform on ABC just about every Sunday to be talking about these things. And I'm going to continue to. So I think that what is important to save the party is to save the two-party system, to not allow what's happened in the last year or so now where, the Democrats really have not had an effective counterweight, not only because we've lost all our majorities, but also because we've been, large parts of the party have been obsessed with looking in the rearview mirror and
Yeah.
talking about 2020. And let me tell you something. One thing I know, and it was just in New Jersey, I know it's in Maryland, and it's across the country. When Democrats get power, they know what to do with it. They know how to put things in place that are hard to ever reverse. And if people are looking for history on this, just look at Obamacare. Whether you're for it or against it, it's still here. And my guess is that it is never going
Oh,
away
it's not going anywhere. No.
because, even when we had majorities, we couldn't get rid of it because one of the truisms of politics, as you know, is once you start to give people something for nothing, it's hard to take it back.
Yeah, but you're making an excellent point there, and it's one of the things that I found very problematic and really somewhat emblematic of where the party is and how a once proud party winds up in 2020 with no platform. And that is when you go back and you look where there's infrastructure announcements every week that led to the bridge, talk about the ultimate bridge to nowhere. Or what we saw with Obamacare, having been on the forefront of that fight, having been the Republican amongst many who fired Nancy Pelosi in 2010. Yep. And y'all bitches who hired her back, yeah, that's on y'all, right? We fired her. So everybody now is complaining about all of that. But the reality remains that repeal and replace, wonderful slogan, but where was the underlying policy, particularly when you consider the roots of Obamacare were born out of the Heritage Foundation? So you would figure that at least we would have a counter narrative to something that we had a hand in creating if what we created was bastardized by the opposition. Yep. And so the fact that we could not make that case, I think, speaks to something you reference in the book and spend quite a bit of time talking about, and that is the core Republican values that are armored by the Lincolns and the Roosevelts, Teddy, the Reagans, the Eisenhowers, that philosophical underpinning that defined generations of Republicans. When you start stripping that bare and exposing it, it becomes a very difficult thing for people when we're the ones who are kind of doing the stripping and tearing it down by not reinforcing it with good policy. So I hear you talking a lot about and making references back to policy, but I think even before you start down that road, don't you need to reestablish a philosophical anchor? Who are we and what do we believe?
Yeah, because you're right. Because I think one of the biggest mistakes made in the Trump era, where there were a number of mistakes made, but one of the biggest ones was the complete abandonment of any sense of fiscal conservatism, which has always been part of who we were and what we did. It took away from us any sense that we were moving in the right direction, and you have to keep the promises that you make.
Right.
Not every one of them, but the big ones you have to. And I remember talking to President Trump at the time about his agenda, and I said to him, look, this was in the first week of the presidency, Michael. He called me and said, what order would you do these three things in? Tax reform, infrastructure, and Obamacare repeal. And I said, I would do them in that exact order. I said, do tax reform first because it will solidify our base and help to reinvigorate the economy. but then you have to do infrastructure in a way which is going to reach out and get some Democratic votes and show people that we can actually accomplish something that helps to build the country
Mm-hmm.
again. And then and only then, when you've had a partisan victory and a bipartisan victory, do you try to tackle Obamacare with a substantive plan to be able to replace it. He came back to me about a week later and said, no, we have to do the Obamacare thing first. And I said, why? And he said, well, Paul Ryan told me that we have to do Obamacare first because we need the savings from Obamacare to pay for the tax cut. And I said, tell Paul Ryan to go give Ronald Reagan a call and ask him if he gave a crap about that in 1981.
Thank you.
And I said to him, Mr. President, I like Paul a lot. I said, but don't listen to the propeller heads. The propeller heads will get you in trouble down there. I said, remember what you promised the American people. You said you were a builder who was going to rebuild the country, and you were going to rebuild the economy and our infrastructure. Those were the two central promises that you made. And as it turns out, he did pass the tax reform ultimately. But as you said, infrastructure was left now for the Democrats to take credit for, having gotten done with some Republican help. And Obamacare turned out to be a complete failure, which led to, I would tell you, our monument was at least one of the factors that led to our monumental losses in 2018.
Mm-hmm.
And when you think about where is the party now? Think about this. We lost the House, the Senate, and the White House in 2 years, between 2018 and 2020. The only other time that's happened in 2 years to the Republican Party in its history since the 1850s was 1930 to 1932 under Herbert Hoover. And at that point, after we lost in 32, Democrats had the White House for 28 of the next 36 years. Well, we won't be able to survive that as a party if we go into that level of drought. And that's why I think it was imperative to write the book too, was to remind people that historical context, to give them a sense of urgency to get back to those basics that the last third of the book talks about. And to me, that's the argument we need to have between 2022 and 2024. 2022 election is going to be an election about opposing the Democrats and what they've done. And it's always about the incumbent party. And we can get by in 2022, in my view, without having to have this argument. I wish we would, but we can get by without it. But between 2022 and 2024, Michael, we got to decide who we are.
Right.
Because you can't win the presidency without telling people who you are and what you're going to do, and doing so credibly.
We're going to take a quick break in that conversation with my good friend, Governor Chris Christie, and his new book that we are sort of drilling down on, Republican Rescue, Saving the Party from Truth Deniers, Conspiracy Theorists, and the Dangerous Policies of Joe Biden. We'll be back with more with Chris right after this. Welcome back, everybody. As you know, we're having a great conversation with the former governor, the 55th governor of the great state of New Jersey, Chris Christie, and his new book, Republican Rescue, Saving the Party from Truth Deniers, Conspiracy Theorists, and the Dangerous Policies of Joe Biden. We ended talking about making that transition after the 2022 cycle, leading into 2024, the party affirming very clearly for the American people what it is, what it believes, what it stands for. There are a number of headlines that I thought were pretty fun, particularly from our good buddy George Will, who wrote in the Washington Post just a few weeks ago, if Trump runs in 24, he may find Chris Christie ready to rumble, baby. Okay, he didn't have the baby part on. That was my editorial edition. But you like right. But I love the way he opened it up, and it really kind of sets the stage. But I want to drill down on how meaty this potential race could be. So Will starts out, the New Jersey political style is simmering truculence between brawls. Chris Christie, the state's former two-term Republican governor, indicates by his words and, as important, his demeanor of surplus pugnacity, that he is spoiling for a fight. He is brimful of combativeness, even when on a recent evening, his attention was divided among Republicans' misadventures, President Biden's shortcomings and a plate of pasta. So I guess you guys were having a little din-din, right? Talk to me about how you're approaching 2024. And you said, and I want to talk about this in a little bit, as you noted in a recent interview with Nicole Wallace on MSNBC, everybody else is saying you're running. You have not made that intention, declared that intention. And I'm not asking you to do that now because I know how the game works. You got to study it. You got to understand it. But as you're sizing it up, how do you see, in light of the fact that Trump has such a hold on a core part of the base, you note that you were not a never Trumper. You were right there and advisor. It would be like now me on the other hand. I made very clear I wasn't buying any of this ish, right? From the beginning. But you've navigated that space. How do you begin to, in light of your book, looking to do a rescue plan, but then be a leader in that plan of pulling the party away from Trumpism? How do you do that?
I think you do it both with facts and persuasion, right? So, in the areas where you agreed with some of the policies that the president pursued.
Yep. And I did.
In general, the tax reform is something that I generally agree with. I might have done it a little bit differently, but I generally agree with it. You emphasize the things that you agree with, but you make very clear where you disagree. Look, I think that we didn't do as good a job vis-a-vis China on the trade deal that we could have.
Right.
Done. I don't think that saying that President Xi is doing a great job on COVID, in January and February of 2020, and throwing bouquets at him that we trust him, should be something we should ever be saying about somebody who is a murdering dictator. I think there are a lot of ways where people who are part of our base, as you described it, when they think about those things, they strip away the salesmanship and they think about them, they know that we can do better. And I think part of the argument in 2024 is going to be, we cannot afford to lose.
Mm-hmm.
And this cannot be a vanity exercise for somebody to soothe their own ego. And, look, you and I both lost elections.
Yep.
And there's nothing that's as painful in politics as losing. I'd argue that losing is more painful than winning is gratifying.
Right.
It's very personal. It's a personal rejection of you. And there's no way to get around that. And I think, Donald Trump, never having been involved in politics before as a candidate, only having served, had one race and he had won it when he lost in 2020, simply could not deal with, from an ego perspective, that problem. And when you look at the voting in 2020, I don't see how he wins a general election in 2024. The white suburban voter, educated voter, who abandoned him in droves in 2020, I don't know why they come back. Because they rejected him not based on policy, Michael. They rejected him based on personality.
Yeah.
I told a story in the book about the woman the day before the election who I saw in my supermarket in my home county, and you got to know New Jersey really well.
Mm-hmm.
Chairman, Morris County, my county.
Oh, yeah.
Had not voted for a Democrat for president since Lyndon Johnson. He was the last one they had voted for. And right before that, they voted for Nixon in 60. So this was this is a Republican place. She came up to me. She was a volunteer for both my campaigns, and she asked me what I thought was going to happen on Election Day. And I said, look, I think it's going to be closer than people think, but I think Biden's going to win. And she put her head down and started shaking her head. I said, I know you're disappointed. She goes, no, I voted for Biden. And it's a woman in her early 60s, smart, Republican her whole life. I said, you voted for Biden. I said, why? And she said, Governor, I couldn't listen to that voice for another 4 years.
Yeah.
That's intensely personal. So I think as you look at 24, what you need to be able to say to the party is, look, I'm not going to reject everything that Donald Trump did during his 4 years, because I don't think everything he did was in any way wrong. But we cannot be a party of a person. We have to be a party of ideas. And we have to resell that to the people in our party during the primary season. And nothing makes you hungrier than when you don't eat, right, Michael?
Oh
And
yeah. Oh
these
yeah.
folks haven't eaten now, they're for a year, and they're not going to eat, from the presidential buffet for another 3. And I think that does change the way people feel about things. And I think you had the same hunger in 2016 after 8 years of Barack Obama, and Donald Trump was able to exploit that. I think 2024 he's seen as a much different figure. And look, if he continues to conduct himself by executing vendettas
Right.
every
But that's what that's going to be. I mean, I tell people all the time, President Trump in 2025 is all about vendetta. It's all about payback because that's the nature of the man.
It
But
was that
even
way in 2022, Michael. I mean, look, you
yeah,
see what's happening with Brian Kemp in Georgia.
that's right.
You can agree or disagree with Brian Kemp on certain policy issues, but as a Republican, he has been a pretty mainstream Georgia Republican governor, and he doesn't deserve to be primaried, especially from a guy like David Perdue, who frankly doesn't have a policy disagreement with Brian Kemp. Right? This is personal. The endorsement he made the other day of the governor of Alaska,
Of Alaska, yeah.
that was conditioned upon the governor not endorsing his incumbent United States senator. I mean, this is vendetta politics. It's personal. It has nothing to do with issues. And we can't win that way. We simply can't. And I think that the job of the person who's going to wind up leading the party in 2024 is going to be able to convince the Republican Party that winning for the country is more important than winning for any one individual.
I appreciate that very, very much. So in getting to that point, let's jump off on 2022, because one of the things that George Will noted in his piece about you is he says that you make the implicit case for yourself that you can appeal to the Trumpist majority, right, in the Republican base without further debasing it. In other words, okay, this far and no further. So here's the edge. I'm pulling you back. But when I look at going into 2022, I see 2022 just as I saw 2009 and 10 as the setup for what would come 2 years later in 2012. Which is why I was hoping I would have gotten reelected, because what I wanted to do in terms of branding the party nationally, its national narrative, was to connect all of those pieces in such a way that the middle of the country is as much a part of the conversation as the two coasts, because that's where you and I live. That's the backyard of America. That's Jersey. That's where I grew up in Northwest DC, right? That's Prince George's County, where blue collar families, government workers, union workers are trying to do their business. So helping them understand who we are as Republicans is an essential part of our journey and our story. But then when you ask yourself if you are positioning the party to go in a certain direction, what do you think 2023 looks like if Jim Jordan or Kevin McCarthy are the majority leader? And McCarthy's already said, hell, not only will Taylor Greene and others, who Boebert and others, get their committee assignments back, but they will be elevated inside the Republican caucus. I see that as 6 steps back from where you're trying to go. So 2022 does matter in setting up 2024. And do you think it's important for you to sort of assert some voice in that as a leader, as a potential leader of this emerging Republican Party, to say, you know what, Kevin, we're going to stand down on that. Now, not saying Kevin McCarthy shouldn't be Speaker of the House. I personally don't believe he should be, because he hasn't shown me the gravitas, AKA balls, to be the leader. But okay, the party of the caucus will make that decision. I'm not trying to position myself to be a leader of the national party in that sense. You are. So how do you shape the 2022 cycle? Because I think you need to begin there before you get to 2024.
Yeah, I think a few things. I think you have to look at three very distinct sets of races, and I think each one of them has to be approached differently, right?
Yeah.
So you have the governor's races. Start there, which I think are going to be, and when I left as chairman of the RGA in 2014, we had 31 governorships
Hmm.
out of the 50. We're down to 26 now, and when we've got risks, we're gonna. Massachusetts is going to be very challenging.
Yeah.
Leaving. Your state of Maryland will be challenging with Larry Hogan leaving. Those were pickups that we got in 2014 that we maintained for the last 8 years. We've got some discord in Arizona where we should be able to maintain that governorship, but we got some discord in the primary we got to deal with. So I think that first you got to deal with the governor's races and say that we want practical conservatives to be nominated who can win, because we know how important it is to hold those governorships for 2024 to make sure that we have Republican governors in place during a presidential election. Second set of races are the House races. Look, I look at those House races and I think to myself, we will literally have to throw up on ourselves not to win the House back. It almost doesn't matter. It is a referendum on Joe Biden
Right.
and Nancy Pelosi. And so I wouldn't spend a lot of time worrying about what's being expressed in those races, because in the end, when those people get to Washington, they're not going to be the ones that are going to be making a lot of the final calls.
Yeah, but they'll be the ones that'll be calling for hearings and investigations into the Biden administration, Hunter Biden, putting proposals to impeach the president. All of that stuff will be a national distraction because it's not about governing, because we're not putting forward a governing principle. I mean, we don't have, what was our countermeasure to the president's infrastructure plan? What was our countermeasure to the president's, healthcare plan? We don't have that. So, and I don't see that coming from Jim Jordan. I don't see that coming from Kevin McCarthy. And you're right, it's the House and they'll get it. But if the speaker and the majority leader in the House are every day pushing a narrative that's counter to where you think the party should be going to do the setup for 2024, how do you think that helps?
I don't know that it helps, but I also don't know that it hurts, because in the end, I think that the House majority will be essentially an opposition party to the White House, and that people will not necessarily be expecting them to put forward a lot of things that they're going to get done, because they know that the president would never sign them. So they're going to be seen as an opposition party. I think what's really going to matter, Michael, in this group are the Senate races, and do we retake a majority in the Senate or not?
Right.
Because then we can then I think your point is very valid. If we have both the House and the Senate, then we have to come up with a plan that we're going to put on the president's desk and force him to veto, or negotiate with him to try to get him to sign. And either one could happen. Look, you remember we're both old enough to remember back to 1995.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think when Newt Gingrich got elected speaker, anybody thought that Newt Gingrich was going to be a conciliator of any kind.
Right.
Yet, what Gingrich was able to accomplish with the group there was welfare reform and some other things that they actually negotiated with Bill Clinton, balanced budget. And so things.
Yeah, but he laid that out in a plan. It was that was the contract with America. So he made it very clear what a governing Republican majority would look like. Tell me what that looks like in 2023.
And in 2023, I suspect that you will not see the same thing. And if it's going to come from any place, it's going to come from the Senate, not from the House. Yeah, and remember, Bob Dole, God bless him.
God bless him.
He was a follower in 95, 96. He followed the contract with America when he became majority leader for Gingrich.
That's
and
right.
Gingrich was really the moving factor. I do think that depending upon who gets elected to the Senate, and if there's a Republican majority, that the thought leadership is going to have to come out of the Senate, not necessarily out of the House, for all the reasons that you just mentioned. And I think that if we have a majority in both, it's going to be incumbent upon the Senate to come forward with those proposals that they're going to try to convince McCarthy, assuming he's the speaker, and others that they need to go along with to try to force Biden's hand a bit. And remember, we'll have a weakened Joe Biden, even weaker than he is now, if that's possible. He'll be a lame duck. He's not going to run for re-election. I don't care what he says. He's you and I both know there is there is a greater chance.
I'm suspicious. Let's put it that way.
I've known Joe Biden since I was in college. Joe Biden and I went to the same college. He went many years before me, but we both are graduates of the University of Delaware. I got to know Joe Biden while I was a college student there. So I've known Joe Biden now since the mid 1980s. So it's nearly 40 years we've known each other. I don't have any belief that Joe Biden will run for re-election. And so you're going to have a real vacuum in the country depending upon what goes on. I think it's going to be incumbent upon the Senate and ultimately upon the governors too, in terms of what they're doing at the state level to try to set that agenda. And others of us who are in the national leadership of the party have to be expressing all those things. It will not look like 95, 96. But remember, despite all those things, what Gingrich did 95, 96, many would argue, is set up Bill Clinton to get reelected in 96 because he made Clinton look much less radical than he did before. And so
I don't think we have to worry about that from this crew.
No, and that's my point, right? So I think that they're not going to necessarily want to get those kind of things done.
But is that the politics the country needs right now after January 6th, which I want to ask you about in a sec? I mean, we had our party instigate a friggin' insurrection.
It is. I agree that's the kind of politics that we need right now, but I don't think that we have either a president nor will we have a Congress who will be capable of it. And you need two to tango.
All right.
You needed political muscle and brains like Gingrich and Clinton to be able to get that done. And no matter what you think of either of them,
right,
from a personal perspective or their political philosophies, they were both extremely skilled politicians who knew how to make deals, knew how to make things work, and they both were able to do that. I don't think we have the folks on the scene. Look, McConnell can do it when he wants to. And can make deals when he wants to. He just showed it with the debt ceiling issue. That was very creatively done, I think, by McConnell. And I think McConnell didn't get nearly the credit he deserved for making sure that debt ceiling thing was not going to be driven off the cliff.
Right.
And gave everybody an ability to be able to do what they needed to do politically, while also the country doing what they needed to do to maintain our credit worthiness. So I think McConnell has shown the ability to be able to do that. But I don't think that Biden, Michael, will have the strength to do it. So I think what 2023 is going to be is a setup of the arguments for 2024 rather than a laying out of the solutions. It's going to be a setup of the argument for 2024 with what will, in my view, be two new people running for the presidency. It won't be Joe Biden and it won't be Donald Trump, in my view.
I think that's a very interesting analysis. I agree with you that I've always been suspicious of Trump getting back into the race for a whole host of reasons, starting with I don't think he wants to do the work, but I think that it just isn't that. I think he wants to be able to control the outcome. I think he wants to put his imprimatur on whoever that individual is, which I think really begs the question whether it's, you, our friend Larry Hogan, maybe a couple of guys that we saw running in the 2016 cycle coming back, who are, you've got Hogan, who is clearly did not accommodate Trump at all in one wing, who kind of, straddled that space. Then you've got others, like Cruz and Rubio, who just completely capitulated. Then there is, I think, the figure that to me is going to be the most interesting to watch, and that is Liz Cheney. And from what I'm hearing from various circles around Washington, there's a lot of curiosity, maybe some interest, but certainly a lot of curiosity about where she may factor into this Republican presidential narrative going into 2024, which I think would be a stunning contrast in many ways. So you're going to have this very interesting political landscape, Governor, for Republican candidates. Donald Trump still will be a major figure in that space.